Hi there, and welcome to Ella Merrill. My name is Merrill, and I like to do deep dives into the latest research on neurodiversity.
And I'm Alistair. I'm a psychotherapist, and I love creating the metaphors and stories that help make sense of it all.
And together, we're exploring how neurodiversity shapes our lives. Let's get started.
This episode of Alan Merrill is brought to you by my co-pilot AI for when your willpower won't. You know, those 2 a.m. moments when you're supposed to be going to sleep, but you can't stop doom scrolling. Or when you're stuck on the sofa with your phone after work. Well, my co-pilot AI is your personal AI co-pilot that can help you get on with the things that you really want and need to do exactly in those moments. Whether that's doing the laundry, getting on with your projects or hobbies, or just actually going to bed, my co-pilot AI can help you with all of this. Check it out at https://mycopilot.ai. That's mycopilot.ai for when your willpower won't.
Just a note to say that we're explorers and storytellers. This podcast is not intended as therapy, advice, recommendation, or medical authority. We are just like you, inviting you along on our journey of trying to make a little sense out of fascinating research on neuroscience and neurodiversity as best as we can.
Awesome. So on which happy notes, hi.
Hi, good to see
How's
you
it
again.
going? Likewise. What have we got lined up for today?
A few things. One cool thing that I found is that, so basically that I'm going back to the gut microbiome again, that the gut microbiome is directly, like we've been talking about before, about how the gut microbiome is important for all body functions and how it influences the blood-brain barrier and how like everything that you put in your body in terms of food is in some way influencing how your body works. But now I found that also it is directly affecting dopamine regulation in the way that, so what they found is that some specific enzyme, CDT, stands for, no, never mind, I'm not going to pronounce this, it's abbreviated as CDT.
Okay, I'll go do the English language bit, shall I?
Yes, sure.
And that's did you say
an
that was an
enzyme.
enzyme?
Yeah, it's an enzyme.
Cyclohexadienyl dehydratase is how I would roll that off the tongue. Okay, they've made that one nice and easy, haven't they? Okay, tell us what it does. Why do we care?
Okay, yeah, the thing that they found is that CDT plays a role in synthesizing phenylalanine. That's in the images of there, which is a precursor of dopamine and norepinephrine.
So for the benefit of our listeners, we've got a kind of a cross-section of the intestine, blood, brain, it's a simplified version, but it goes intestine, you've got tryptophan, phenylalanine, and tyrosine. And there's a bunch of microbes there. And somehow, some of this stuff gets into the blood. And then once it's in the blood, it wanders its way up to the brain. And when it gets to the brain, it crosses over the blood-brain barrier. And then tryptophan sort of is involved in 5-HTP, which then is involved in serotonin, and phenylalanine and tyrosine. And then there's L-DOPA in the mix, which people might have heard of. And then that goes dopamine and noradrenaline. That's basically the picture that we're looking at. And in the blood bit, so we've got the intestine, the mucosal lining to the blood, and then the blood with the blood-brain barrier to the brain. And in this diagram, the blood bit just has lots of question marks on it, which is kind of handy.
Yeah, I guess that means that it's not sure what's happening. Like the amino acids go into the blood, but of course it's not certain where the blood is going. Like the blood is flowing through the whole body, but probably in that process is also crossing, I don't know, the liver, the kidneys. A lot of stuff is happening in different parts of the body where the blood is going through before it is reaching the brain. So I guess the question marks mean that there might be process going on in between the intestine and the brain.
So my take home from what I'm noticing in this picture is that the gut health, the gut bacteria is what generates tryptophan, phenylalanine, and tyrosine in the gut. And then there's a big question mark, and then just sort of it gets there eventually to the brain. But without those gut bacteria, we might not be generating enough tryptophan, phenylalanine, and tyrosine in the gut.
Exactly. And that's exactly the difference between essential and non-essential amino acids, which I think I've explained a few recordings ago.
Let's do that one again.
Yeah. The difference between, so there's amino acids, which are basically proteins, And there's essential amino acids and non-essential amino acids, where the non-essential ones can be generated by the body itself, by the human body. And essential amino acids we need to receive from the intestine. So you can either ingest them directly via proteins, via food that contains these essential amino acids, or we can activate the gut microbiome to produce them for us. And tryptophan and phenylalanine are both essential amino acids and can be produced by the gut.
That's interesting. Okay. So we can't make tryptophan and phenylalanine. So we either need to farm it in with our gut bacteria, or we need to just eat the damn stuff.
And those things are required to create or produce serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine in the body, in the brain, because they are made from those amino acids.
Norepinephrine or noradrenaline?
Yeah, I also found out what's the difference.
Mm-hmm.
They are the same thing. They can be used interchangeably, but it is kind of common. People generally refer to norepinephrine when talking about the substance in the brain, and to noradrenaline when talking about the substance in the rest of the body. But it is the same thing.
I had no idea. It's literally the same.
Yeah, it's literally the same thing, but it's just people just. I think it originates from like the different fields of science.
So we had two different researchers who found the same thing, named it differently, and
now norepinephrine is used for the brain and noradrenaline is used for the body. But it's the same thing, and it can be used interchangeably because it's the same thing.
Okay. So basically what you're telling me is that the body's ability to generate both serotonin and the dopamine pathway stuffs like noradrenaline, norepinephrine is entirely dependent on making sure that we have enough of these essential amino acids that we can't make ourselves. So our body can't actually make us happy and functioning and fully dopaminergic, like fully functional, unless we eat the right stuff. And we know that obviously in other areas, but like very specifically, if you've got ADHD and dopamine issues there, if you're not eating a diet and your gut microbiome is not well farmed enough internally to be able to generate this stuff, you're not going to have it. You can't synthesize it out of nothing. In fact, you can't synthesize it at all. You can only either eat it directly or ensure that your gut bacteria is in a good enough state that it can do it for you. Wow, we're so dependent on other creatures for our balance, our regulation. We actually can't. Which also implies that you can't just will yourself into it. No amount of meditation and no amount of sort of sitting with it and trying to land it that can make up for the fact that it's just not there. If you don't have the precursors. If your gut microbiome just isn't generating enough of it, you have a problem.
Well, you can, as I said, there's two ways of getting these amino acids. So you can either activate your microbiome to produce them for you, but you can actually also just eat them directly because essential amino acids are present in proteins.
Yeah. It's going to be cheese and chocolate, isn't it? It's going to be cheese and chocolate because every ADHD under the sun that I know is a cheese and chocolate fiend. We'll go into the kitchen and be like, right, I'm tidying the kitchen. I'm going to tidy the kitchen. And then we watch our bodies open the fridge and hike off a chunk of cheese while we're sitting there in our heads going, but I'm supposed to tidy the kitchen. So we're basically fueling ourselves for the work ahead. Okay.
And then we get to the part where I don't fully understand it, which includes this CDT enzyme, right? So what they found is that this CDT enzyme is significantly more abundant in the gut microbiome of people with ADHD. So people with ADHD have more CDT. And CDT is used for synthesizing phenylalanine. So technically, phenylalanine should be much more abundant in people with ADHD. But somehow it seems to have the effect that if the gut microbiome is, by means of CDT, producing more phenylalanine, then the brain will do less of that somehow. Well, it could also be happening because it's not necessarily the case that people with ADHD have less dopamine, but they have more unstable dopamine. So what could also be happening here is that phenylalanine is produced more abundantly. And as a result, there's more phenylalanine, there's more stuff that can be converted into dopamine and norepinephrine. But maybe that process of converting it into dopamine and norepinephrine is unstable, meaning that sometimes there's too little and sometimes there's too much.
So it's almost like if you imagine, let's say, a factory that makes sofas, and the sofa factory needs wood, foam, and the covering. And the factory, for some reason, has a broken timber machine that can't make the frame because the timber's broken, right? So the foreman, the owner of the factory comes along and goes, why aren't we producing enough sofas? Let's order more foam in because we need to make more sofas. So lots of foam's arriving, but it's not actually the foam that's bust. It's the timber machine. It's the saw or something like that. So maybe the body, in its attempt to regulate, is making us do things like eating loads of cheese that has a consequence of phenylalanine. So that's almost like a signal, a warning sign that our body's trying to regulate something but can't, because actually the thing that's bust is something else, but our bodies can't solve that, so solve the next best thing or try and solve it, or it's in the mix in the solving effort somehow. So that,
and then maybe as soon
potentially
as some system is activated which does actually produce the dopamine from phenylalanine, then this explodes and all phenylalanine that's present is converted into dopamine and you're dopamine flooded.
And then you're having a hypomanic episode where you can just get loads of shit done for a moment. You're like, I'm fine. I don't have ADHD. I'm fine. Look at me. I'm busted.
Exactly. Because there's loads of stuff that could be converted into dopamine. And maybe if that happens eventually.
Interesting. So the theme is still, this is dysregulated. This is outside a balanced mode. And that is what we're kind of still looking at with the ADHD. So is there an implication here on anything that we can do about it?
I think this specific process of phenylalanine is a bit too, I'm not sure if we can regulate this specific process, but of course we can come back to the gut microbiome should be regulated. If we support the gut microbiome better, then there will be less, that will be more balanced.
How? If we regulate the gut microbiome so that we can produce this stuff better, if it's already producing loads of it, it's just unable to do anything with it, then that's almost a bit like going, yeah, let's get more timber and foam into the factory. Yay, whoop-de-doo. But if the saw is broken and you can't actually make the damn stuff, then does it really matter?
I don't think it's as simple as that, because it's not like if the gut microbiome is present, it's not a linear thing. It's not like there's more gut microbiome, so we produce more amino acids, so there's more dopamine. It's not like that. All of these things are about balances. There's tons of different microbiota, and they all produce different things. And the point is that the types of bacteria that are present in the gut should be balanced, should have some ratio with respect to each other. So they produce all the things that are required by the body in reasonable ratios in some kind of balanced way.
But if you're always hunting cheese and stuff, you're going to be feeding the particular gut microbiome that really loves cheese, which means you're probably actually driving yourself out of balance by trying to rebalance. I think we all know that if you eat too much cheese, and especially if you add it with bread and you put it on burgers and you fry the damn thing, and they call that an American diet, don't they? That's not good for anyone. But I think there's a strong correlation, isn't there, between people with ADHD and choosing foods that feel good, but not necessarily healthy. But we're actually not in control of that feel good, I think. I don't think we go for cheese just because it feels good. I think we couldn't stop ourselves because our body, our unconscious hankerings and urges and, what's the word I'm looking for? When you really want to eat something specific, you have a craving for it. We have strong cravings. And that's, and we're dysregulated and our executive function is bust. So when we have strong cravings, we're highly likely to act on them. So there seems to be a bit of a sort of vicious cycle here where potentially the very thing that we're unbalanced with, and our bodies would try to rebalance, but then eat loads of stuff that actually kind of doesn't really help rebalance, but just throws it more out of balance, potentially, at least in some of these pathways. And then we end up with a gut microbiome that's even worse, that then makes the whole cycle even worse. And we can just end up chasing ourselves down an increasingly unhealthy spiral, he says, imagining his own fridge right now and thinking, yep, that sounds about right.
I just find another article that actually has pretty solid advice on which things do improve the gut microbiome, like 2 categories of things that you might eat in order to improve these things, just from food, which are short-chain fatty acids and omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids. Short-chain fatty acids basically just improve the gut microbiome specifically because these are called bacterial metabolites.
Yeah,
Basically
short chain
meaning
probably means easy to digest, which means
Yeah,
microbes
exactly.
have the chemistry to do it. They don't need vast amounts of stuff to break it down. They can do it quite basically.
And where they can be found is high fiber foods. So this is basically grains, fruits, vegetables, so things with fiber. And fiber is
Natural
literally
food, in other words.
Yeah, and fiber
Natural
basically
plant
means
food.
cells with cell membranes. Is that called a membrane?
Like
the
plant food. Yeah,
plant food. Yeah.
yeah.
That is very good for the gut microbiome. And also resistant starch. And at least for the listeners, maybe for you as well, I don't know. Resistant starch is, so there are starchy foods such as potatoes, rice, pasta, that starch, and usually starch is a chain. And if that starch is in the gut, then the chain is kind of cut up in pieces, which become sugars. And so they can be used as sugars. If you first cook the starchy products, so that you cook the potatoes, the rice, the pasta, then these chains become kind of balls, become more compact.
Oh, really? They
And
sort
they,
of screw up on themselves.
yeah, so they become a ball. They become more compact, and
Okay.
they can't be cut up in sugars anymore by the
Yeah, because
gut.
presumably the cutting enzymes that you do that work just physically cannot actually get at the points on the chain. So it kind of wraps itself onto a ball and protects itself from destruction, which means that it doesn't turn into sugar and is actually harder to digest.
I do realize that I made a mistake in explaining that. It's not actually, it's about, like, so you cook the starchy food, but the part where it becomes a ball is when you have first cooked it and then you put it in the fridge and it cools down.
This is why you put potatoes in the fridge and it's awesome. You want to have cold potatoes the day after, not the day you've cooked them. But I still want to know, why does this help your gut? Let's see whether the big AIs know. The AI says letting cooked starches like potatoes supports the microbiome because it increases the amount of resistant starch, which is what you were describing to us. So it's a dietary fiber that resists digestion in the small intestine and instead ferments in the large intestines, where it serves
Right.
as food for beneficial gut bacteria. So it's protected briefly through the small intestine so that it can get as far as the large intestine, where the gut microbiomes then go, oh, food, and they can attack it. So basically, we're not very good at digesting these balls of starch. The microbiomes in our large intestine are. So it protects it from us and makes it available to them. And it's fermentation, which presumably means you get to fart lots too. And this is very useful because short-chain fatty acids like butyrate and acetate and propionate, which provides energy to colon cells, supports the integrity of the gut lining, reduces inflammation. Now, that is something I care massively about, reducing inflammation. I've been to the doctors, actually, interesting stuff around my eye, and they're like, yeah, you've just got mad levels of inflammation. So I'm now on antihistamines for my eyes because they're dry, because they are apparently permanently having an allergic reaction. And I'm like, is that just baseline inflammation? And they're like, could be dust, could be your cat. If it turns out to be my cat, I'm going to have a small disagreement with the universe, because like that would be really harsh, but it could genuinely be. So I think inflammation, I mean, we've talked about this a lot, haven't we? That inflammation just basically makes neurodiversity worse. So I'm seeing the bacteria Bifidobacteria and lactobacilli here, and I saw those mentioned as well when I was looking at the CDT stuff. Bifidobacterium is significantly increased in the ADHD cohort. So we have way more of that. And that is correlated with an increase in the cyclohexadienyl dehydratase, the CDT. So bifidobacterium we apparently have quite a lot of, and they thrive on resistant starch. But it is also the case, isn't it, that along with the cheese, one of the things that we really like is, potatoes and chips and stuff. I wonder if that's
If you put
same
your chips in the
thing.
fridge.
Yeah, but maybe we're kind of leaning towards it, because even if it's cooked, like even if it's better if it's in the fridge overnight, right? Because then that increases the amount of balling up of this starch that happens. I'm going to speculate that maybe even just, the nature of the thing is that even cooking it straight away, some of it will get balled up. So you're still ingesting some of it. You're just also ingesting loads of super high energy, low nutrient carbs that your intestine does digest. But if you eat enough chips, presumably you don't digest all of it, and enough of it gets down into your larger intestine to be of use to that. So maybe this is why we also overeat, because we've got to get enough of it through the system to get all the way to the end. Interesting stories. I don't know if they're true, but it's the sort of things that our bodies do.
Could be. And then another thing that is apparently very good is omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids.
Is that fish?
I think it's mainly fish.
Oily fish, isn't it? Like mackerel and stuff like that. There needs to be like an ADHD pill, doesn't there? Just like call it the ADHD pill. And basically, it's just a whole load of omega-3 with loads of vitamin D and D3 and K2 and maybe some resistant starch like pre-balled up in it. Like the caking ingredient is actually cold cooked potatoes, and that's actually what the pill is.
And then everything else is
mashed
into the potato.
Omega-3 oil. Yeah. Why don't we should start a business selling ADHD potatoes. ADHD chips. Like, I think that would sound like hotcakes or hot chips or whatever.
That's actually brilliant.
To the listener who is listening to this and is inspired to be an entrepreneur, which is common for ADHDers, A, go do it. Go make this happen. Be awesome. B, we'll only take 0.5% royalties. Okay. And then we got to throw eggs in as well. I can't remember why, but eggs are really good for some reason. But I think eggs are like super fuels for ADHD, I think. We've gone on tangent. Sorry, I'm not the researcher. You're the researcher. I apologize for crossing out of my lane. I've thrown us for a loop now because we don't know.
Or maybe it's probably just their protein levels.
It's really good for protein.
Yeah. And that's again the
You see, it's not just me. It's not just me. Phenylalanine is just an asshole word. It's got half a bloody song in the middle of it and then a number at the end.
The essential amino acids.
Chemistry at the beginning. It's like chemistry to song to numbers, like, calculations. That's too many domains of human thought for one word to cover.
Yes. But eggs contain a lot of essential amino acids.
You know what we've just described? So I'm half German, right? My family's from Bavaria, and we've just described Bavarian food. Like, that's what they do. They make Kartoffeln with like potatoes with loads of cheese and eggs and stuff on them. And now I cannot think about anything other than going and cooking. It's killer. I'm quite hungry. I've become quite hungry. I'm so sorry to the listeners. We've probably, like, anyone who was, I don't know if anyone's on a diet, listening to this episode is probably really unhelpful because we're just talking about loads of food. And I'm sorry, I interrupted you just to make that joke.
That's fine. Now I'm curious about the relationship between different areas of the world and different food practices.
I'm willing to bet you'll see ADHD in... Actually, I saw a little bit of a throwaway comment on TikTok earlier where someone was saying that they'd moved to Japan from America, and she was saying the food's so much better because they don't put toxin in it and blah, 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 brackets, which causes ADHD. And I'm like, is this one of those TikTok conspiracy nonsenses, that people believe all sorts of crap? Or is that something that she knows because she's researched and is like a thing? Like, I don't know. It's hard sometimes to work out whether it's a conspiracy or a thing, but I have heard at least one person say it, which means I'm at least interested in the question of, are we actually eating stuff that, like, beyond just being unhealthy, beyond being, like, for example, microplastics? What do they do to the permeability of the gut lining? do they harm it? If they harm it, does it make it more porous? And if they make it more porous, does it go through? I don't know. I've heard bad things about microplastics in the gut.
I don't think they actually destruct the barriers, but they do pass them.
But then they cross them.
Yeah.
So they get into the bloodstream.
Yeah, and also into the brain.
Which then means they potentially clog up in areas. And so there's a whole load of, maybe this is another episode where we can look at, like, are there, because at the moment I think we've really focused on intrinsics. What's the intrinsic mechanisms, the intrinsic chemistry, the intrinsic biochemistry. But I guess there's also a question of, so as soon as we start talking about food, that's outer world stuff coming in. There's a follow-on question there, isn't there? Which is, okay, what about toxins, heavy metals, things that actually shouldn't be in our bodies, but we are putting in our bodies because of the world that we're in? And does that have an influence? And can you cut them out? Can you look after yourself better? So these are just
I'm
questions
pretty sure
come
that
to
they
mind.
do. Yeah, what I'm thinking is that I'm pretty sure that they do influence the body in some way. They should. They must. I'm not sure to what extent they. I think it will be very difficult to specify whether they, for once, correlate and influence the presence of neuropsychiatric disorders.
Yeah, I mean, was it in our last session that we were saying, or was this something I heard somewhere else? My memory's gone a bit squiffy. But something about like dementia and Parkinson's and the possibility that it's caused by microbes and amoeba getting into the brain and basically eating the brain. And we have no idea because we actually don't have the neuroscience that lets us dig into the brain. Like, you can sample the contents of the gut. You can take blood samples, but actually we can't go into the brain and do like a biochemical analysis of like what's in the brain to be like, are there bacteria in the brain?
Well, we can do that on people who have disease.
Have died.
Yeah.
But that's not quite. So first off, the brain starts turning into goo really, really fast when you die. Like it doesn't maintain its structure. It's actually quite liquid. It's maintained when you live very actively. So it disintegrates very fast. And also it's dead. What you want to find out is what's the living pulse of it. And there is some suggestion that there is much more of a brain microbiome than we used to think. We used to think the brain was sterile. And now we're kind of like thinking, oh, maybe it's got a microbiome, but we're finding it very hard to interrogate that microbiome. But there's at least hypotheses that suggest that things like Parkinson's and stuff, and like, when you get like melting brains, bits of the brain start falling apart, that could be bacteria that's just specializing on that cell and really likes eating those neurons. And then we're like, well, yeah, it doesn't matter what you do. You're being eaten alive from the inside. How do you protect against that? So there's a lot of open questions there and far less actual knowledge. Anyway, did you have another thing, another article? I feel like I interrupted you and you were about to say something like 5 minutes ago when I started getting hung up on food.
Yeah, I thought since we are on food topics, I was just adding that they also did a study on rats where they looked at the combined influence of caffeine and exercise. So they have this rat model for ADHD, which is spontaneous hypertensive rats. That's kind of a commonly used rat model for ADHD because it's rats who have similar symptoms as seen in people with ADHD, such as impulsivity and hyperactivity. And they commonly use that to research ADHD influences, like biological things. And they made different groups with and without caffeine and with and without exercise, and both them and none of them, where they looked at the influence of the combination of these two things on basically cognitive functions. And they found that long time exposure, chronic caffeine intake combined with exercise improved cognition in ADHD via dopamine and serotonin. It makes caffeine normalizes dopamine by reducing the dopamine reuptake in the frontal cortex. It's also hypothesized that caffeine promotes the growth of axons and dendrites in neurons.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
I've heard of that before.
Sounds pretty insane. And I need to note that, like, we're talking about minor doses of caffeine. I'm not talking about like people should
drowning yourself in it. Yeah. And it's not an argument for drinking 10 cups a day or something.
Exactly,
it's like my brain is going to explode.
I just need to say that because we don't need to promote like loads
Actually, we should
of
probably just say
coffees.
generally, like, this is not medical advice. Nothing we say should be treated as medical or therapeutic advice because we're just a couple of people recording a podcast interested in this.
But minor doses of caffeine, especially when combined with exercise, regulate dopamine and serotonin. And what they also state is that unlike psychostimulants, so they also compared it to the use of psychostimulants, which are commonly used in ADHD. They saw that it caused structural changes. So where they saw psychostimulants to cause temporal changes in dopamine levels, in neural connections, in those kinds of things, they saw that the combination of exercise and caffeine actually caused structural changes, like synaptic proteins and in the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus, just changing also after treatment, as they call it.
So I as just a little story here, I was having a chat with a friend last night, actually, and I was saying to him, I feel like a different person to who I was about 5 years ago. We were talking about the startup and what it's like running a startup and how it's just so different from where I used to be. Now, in the last few years, a few things have happened to me. Now, firstly, COVID hit and we all went through that and I had it pretty badly. So that happened, and I swear I've got brain fog from that. I feel dumber than I used to be. Turned 40 a few years ago, and that is correlated with a really big shift in the biochemistry of the body. It was the early 40s, like things change. So I'm probably going through that as well. There's another one. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, there's a few things that happened, but one of them, I started drinking coffee. I didn't used to drink coffee. I started drinking coffee at 40. I was 40 years old when I started drinking coffee because I was doing the startup and I was struggling. And I was looking for things that would support me that weren't ADHD meds, because I like looked at the triage. I got the diagnosis and was like, they recommended one. I looked at all the side effects and I was like, I'm not sure I want to try this. So I was looking for alternatives, and I thought, like, lots of people drink coffee and there is some evidence that it's good for ADHD. So I tried it. And this makes me wonder whether I really feel like a different person to who I was 5 years ago. It's really remarkable how I feel about self, about life. I wonder whether the coffee is part of that it literally kind of re-architected parts of my brain so that I process cognitively differently to how I did before I was 40. It could be a part of the mix. Not very scientific because too many things happened to me when I turned 40. There's also loads of personal stuff that went down. So I have genuinely 6 or 7 mad big things that changed when I was 40. So we can't isolate any of them. But anecdotally, could be. So hold on, does that mean that in our ADHD pill we're going to have to add caffeine? Is it caffeine? Or because coffee is a very complex substance. It's not just
it's caffeine.
It is the caffeine specifically. Okay, so we've got to put caffeine in our ADHD pill. So it's potatoes, oil, caffeine, vitamin D, vitamin K.
Yeah.
Oh no, this is our secret sauce. We shouldn't mention this anymore. We have spent the entire, all 10 episodes. What we've really come to as a final conclusion is this pill. It looks like a potato.
It is a potato.
In fact, it's an injected potato.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I actually think that's a good ending for this episode.
We'll call it there for today, and we'll come back with all these exciting ideas next time.
Yes.
See you then.
See you then.
Thanks for listening to our podcast today. If you like what we're talking about and want to hear more, do like, follow, and subscribe. It makes a really big difference. You can also find us on social media and our Patreon, Al and Merrill, or our website, alanmerrill.com. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.